Well, U.S. unilateral sanctions continue to take a toll on Iranians. Now, Iranian-Canadians seem to be the latest targets. In recent days, a Canadian firm has closed some bank accounts belonging to Iranians residing in the country. Members of the Iranian-Canadian community say TD Canada Trust has offered no explanation for its unexpected decision to close their accounts. However, in some cases, TD has notified the account holders that the closures were in line with the West's unilateral sanctions imposed on Iran. The Iranian-Canadian community plans to set up a meeting with TD to discuss the closures and the reason behind them. Well, to discuss that a bit further, we're joined now by Joshua Blakeney, Press TV's correspondent, who's joining us now via Skype from Calgary. Now, Joshua, tell us about the reasons that TD is giving at this point. I'm sure that there is quite an uproar in the greater Canadian community as well about this incident.
Well, indeed, the Toronto Dominion Bank is Canada's second largest bank, and Canada has 120,000 Iranian-Canadians, Canadians of Iranian stock, and I'm sure many of them, until now, were customers of TD. Most Canadians I know have a bank account with TD, and yet TD has allowed themselves to be conscripted into what many would call a kind of Zionist agenda to ostracize and demonize Iran, which the Canadian neocon government, which is in charge at the moment, which of course is widely accused of having stolen the election in 2012 to seize the reins of power in Canada. TD, the management of TD, have allowed themselves to be conscripted into that agenda. The Canadian government has claimed all along they're merely trying to display ostracism towards the Iranian government and not the Iranian people. But, you know, many would say that when they follow what many have called a kind of Zionist agenda, or a kind of racist agenda, really, of trying to dehumanize and vilify the inhabitants of the Middle East, that you'll end up turning those racist policies on your own people. And this is what we're seeing. You know, now we're seeing basically an ethnicized decision to exclude a segment of the Canadian population from certain economic institutions and having certain economic freedoms to use the banks that they want to, merely based on their country of origin, which is highly discriminatory. And I believe that the Iranian community is going to be taking some kind of action to challenge this. And we do have a Canadian constitution that defends people's rights in Canada. And when you have banks that are deciding that they're going to just eliminate a swathe of the community merely based on their affiliations with a foreign government, I mean, you have to bring that into question. And so so that's the situation here in Canada. I have actually just called TD in my capacity as your Canadian correspondent and demanded some answers, and they said they're going to get back to me. We'll have to see if that materializes or whether they'll shy away and hide behind their authority, hide behind the fact that obviously a preponderance of Canadians are not of Iranian heritage and therefore won't be affected by this. But, you know, a country that doesn't protect its minorities is always getting into a dangerous situation with its supported democracy. And many Canadians are upset with the Canadian government's policy. Many Canadians view their government as having kind of outsourced their foreign policy to the Israeli government. In doing research, I've been watching many videos of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, John Baird, who's responsible for the sanctions and the ostracism towards Iran. And it's amazing how many interviews the Canadian Minister of Foreign Affairs conducts from Tel Aviv. The question then becomes, you know, is the Canadian government really enshrining laws that serve the interests of Canadians and even the Canadian elite? Because many would say that, you know, TD Bank has now lost 100,000 potential customers. The 100,000 strong Iranian population of Canada will not be allowed to be a customer there anymore. Oil companies are fleeing the Middle East as Israel destabilizes Syria. Suncor, a prominent oil company based here in Calgary, has just fled Syria. And so many would say that the Canadian national interest and the Canadian economy are being jeopardized by politicians who appear to have more of an interest in what happens in Israel than what happens in Canada. And this is where it has led us into kind of racially charged policies towards a minority group in Canada, a very hard work.
Joshua, if I could just come in here, I wanted to ask you as well about how the Canadian media itself has responded to this entire issue and how the Canadian peoples themselves have responded as a whole.
Canadian people.
Joshua, if you can hear me, I just wanted to ask about how the Canadian media has responded to this entire incident and as well how the Canadian people as a whole have responded to the fact that Iranian Canadians are being targeted this way.
Well, unfortunately, Iranian people have been dehumanized and attacked in a vitriolic way by a majority of Canadian journalists who are basically on side with the war on terror, on side with regime change in Iran that the Canadian government has been promoting. Canada used to be a country that was loved in the world, and there's been a concerted effort to turn Canadian people against the people of the Middle East, and in particular against the Iranian people. So the media are on side with the banks, as we're now seeing, with the sowing the seeds of sectarianism in a country that was once cherished its ability to be cohesive and multicultural. And so there's an agenda being implemented in Canada, which I would say runs up against the innate ideology of the Canadian people to be tolerant and to not be racist. And now we've seen the banks being conscripted into this. Of course, it's well known that banking...
All right, Joshua, I do apologize for interrupting you, but we will have to leave it there for now. That was Joshua Blakeney, Press TV's correspondent, speaking to us live from Calgary. Well, for the first time in Olympic history, every country competing at the London Games will include female athletes. Razi has all the details on that on Sports International coming up just ahead. Stay tuned.